Old Yeller, Chapter 12. For the next couple of weeks, Old Yeller and I had a rough time of it. I lay on the bed inside the cabin, and Yeller lay on the cowhide in the dog run, and we both hurt so bad that we were wallering and groaning and whimpering all the time. Sometimes I hurt so bad that I didn't quite know what was happening. I'd hear grunts and moans and couldn't tell if they were mine or Yeller's. My leg had swelled up till it was about the size of a butter churn. I had such a hot, wild fever that Mama nearly ran herself to death, packing fresh cold water from the spring, which she used to bathe me all over, trying to run my fever down. When she wasn't packing water, she was digging out prickly pear roots and hammering them to mush into a sack, and then binding the mush to my leg for a poultice. We had lots of prickly pear growing close to the house, but they were the big, tall ones, and their roots were no good. The kind that made a good poultice are the smaller size. They don't have much top, but lots of knotty roots, shaped sort of like sweet potatoes, and that kind didn't grow close to the house. Along at the last, Mama had to go clear over to the salt licks to locate that kind. When Mama wasn't waiting on me, she was taking care of Old Yeller. She waited on him just like she did me. She was getting up all hours in the night to doctor our wounds, bathe us in cold water, and feed us when she could get us to eat. On top of that, there were cows to milk, little Arliss to look after, clothes to wash, wood to cut, and old Jumper to worry with. The bad drought that Bud Searcy predicted had come. The green grass all dried up till Jumper was no longer satisfied to eat it. He took to jumping the field fence and eating the corn that I'd never gotten yet around to gathering. Mama couldn't let that go on. That was our bread corn. Without it, we'd have no bread for the winter. But it looked like for a while that there wasn't any way to save it. Mama would go to the field and run Jumper out, and then before she got her back turned good, he'd jump back in and go eating corn again. Finally, Mama figured out a way to keep Jumper from jumping. She tied a drag to him. She got a rope and tied one end of it around his right forefront. To the other end, she tied a big, heavy chunk of wood. By pulling hard, Jumper could move his drag along enough to graze and get water, but any time he tried to rear up for a jump, the drag held him down. The drag on Jumper's foot saved the corn, but it didn't save Mama from a lot of work. Jumper was always getting his chunk of wood hung up behind a bush or a rock, so that he couldn't get away. Then he'd have himself a big scare and rear up, fighting the rope and falling down and pitching and bawling. If Mama didn't hear him right away, he'd start braying, and then he'd keep it up till she went and loosened the drag. Altogether, Mama sure had her hands full, and little Arliss wasn't any help. He was too little to do any of the work, and with neither of us to play with, he got lonesome. He'd follow Mama around every step she made, getting in the way and feeling hurt because she didn't have time to pay him no mind. When he wasn't pestering her, he was pestering me. 12 times a day, he'd come in to stare at me and say, "What you doing in bed, Travis? Why don't you get up? Why don't you get up and come play with me?" He nearly drove me crazy till the day Bud Searcy and Lisbeth came, bringing the pup. I didn't know about the pup at first. I didn't even know that Lisbeth had come. I heard Bud Searcy's talk to Mama when they rode up, but I was hurting too bad to even roll over and look out the door. I remember just laying there, being mad at Searcy for coming. I knew what a bother he'd be to Mama. For all his talk of looking after the women and children of Salt Licks while the men were gone, I knew he'd never turn a hand to any real work. You couldn't catch him offering to chop wood or gathering in a corn crop. All he'd do was sit out under the dog run all day, talking and chewing tobacco and spitting juice all over the place. Top of that, he'd expect Mama to cook him up a good dinner, and maybe a supper if he took a notion to stay that long. And Mama had 10 times to do like it was. In a little bit, though, I heard a quiet step at the door. I looked up. It was Lisbeth. She stood with her hands behind her back, staring at me with her big, solemn eyes. "You hurting pretty bad?" she asked. I was hurting aplenty, but I wasn't admitting it to a girl. "Doing all right," I said. "We didn't know you got hog cut or we'd have come sooner," she said. I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. "Well, anyhow," she said, "I brung you a surprise." Well, I was too sick and worn out to care about a surprise right then, but there was such an eager look in her eyes that I knew I had to say what or hurt her feelings. So I said, "What?" "One of Miss Prissy's pups," she said. And she brought her hands from around behind her back. In the right one, she held a dog pup about as big as a year-old possum. It was dirty white in color, speckled all over with blue spots about the size of cow ticks. She held it by the slack hide at the back of its neck. It hung there, half asleep, sagging in its own loose hide like it was dead. "Born in a badger hole," she said. "7 of 'em. I brung you the best one." I thought, if that puny-looking thing is the best one, Miss Prissy must have had a sorry litter of pups. But I didn't say so. I said, "He sure looks like a dandy." "He is," Lisbeth said. "See, I've been holding him all this time, and he hasn't said a word." I'd heard that one all my life, but if a pup didn't holler when you held him up by the slack hide of his neck, he was sure to turn out to be a gritty one. I didn't think much of that sign. Papa always put more stock in what color was inside a pup's mouth. If the pup's mouth was black inside, Papa said that was the one to choose, and that's the way I felt about it. But right now, I didn't care if the pup's mouth was pea green on the inside. All I wanted was just to quit hurting. I said, "I guess little Arliss will like it." Then I knew I'd said the wrong thing. I could tell by the look in her eyes I'd hurt her feelings after all. She didn't say anything. She just got real still and quiet and kept staring at me till I couldn't stand it and had to look away. Then she turned and went out of the cabin and gave the pup to little Arliss. It made me mad, her looking at me like that. What did she expect anyhow? Here I was laid up with a bad hog cut, hurting so bad I could hardly get my breath, and her expecting me to make a big to-do over a little puny speckled pup. I had me a dog. Old Yeller was all cut up, worse than I was, but he was getting well. Mama had told me that. So what use did I have for a pup? Be all right for little Arliss to play with, keep him occupied and out from underfoot. But when old Yeller and I got well and took to the woods again, we wouldn't have time to wait around on a fool pup, too little to follow. I lay there in bed, mad and fretful all day, thinking how silly it was for Lisbeth to expect me to want a pup, when I already had me a full-grown dog. I lay there, just waiting for the chance to tell her so, too, only she never did come back to give me a chance. She stayed outside and played with little Arliss and the pup, till her grandpa finally wound up his talking and tobacco spitting and got ready to leave. Then I saw her and little Arliss come past the door, heading for where I could hear her grandpa saddling his horse. She looked in at me, and then looked away, and suddenly I wasn't mad anymore. I felt sort of mean. I wish now I could think of the right thing to say about the pup so I could call her back and tell her. I didn't want to go home with her feelings hurt. But before I could think of anything, I heard Grandpa say to Mama, "Now, Mrs. Coates, you are all in sort of a bind here with your man gone and that boy crippled up. I've been sitting out here all evening worrying all about it. That's my responsibility, you know, seeing that everything's taken care of while the men are gone. Now I think I've got a way figured out. I'll just leave our girl Lisbeth here to help you all out." Mama said in a surprised voice, "Why, Mr. Searcy, there's no need for that. It's mighty kind of you and all, but we'll make out all right. No, now, Mrs. Coates, you got too big a load to carry all by yourself. My Lisbeth, she'll be proud to help you out." "But," Mama argued, "she's such a little girl, Mr. Searcy. She's probably never stayed away from home a night." "She's little," Bud Searcy said, "but she's stout and willing. She's like me. When folks are in trouble, she'll pitch right in and do her part. You just keep her here now. You'll see what a big help she'll be." Mama tried to argue some more, but Bud Searcy wouldn't listen. He just told Lisbeth to be a good girl and help Mama out, like she was used to helping out at home. And then he mounted and rode off.